A young police officer vanished in a mountain storm, pinned beneath a fallen tree, and left to fade into the rain. Cradled against her chest, 3 newborn puppies cried for warmth as the forest closed in. The people responsible trusted the storm to erase every trace. They were wrong. Miles away, a Navy SEAL and his aging German Shepherd heard something the mountain couldn't hide. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. The town of Ashford, resting along the eastern shoulder of the Blue Ridge Mountains, usually greeted summer mornings with quiet grace. Fog drifted low across the valleys. Porch lights dimmed as the sun climbed. The air smelled of damp earth and pine sap. But this morning, Ashford woke beneath a bruised sky. At 6:45 a.m., rain had already been falling for hours, steady, relentless, soaking the mountains until the soil could no longer hold itself together. Thunder did not crack so much as it rolled, deep and continuous, like something massive shifting beneath the land. Wind pushed through the forest in uneven bursts, bending younger trees and testing the patience of old ones whose roots had held these slopes for decades. Beyond the town limits, where pavement surrendered to gravel and then to narrow dirt trails, the rain grew louder. The forest amplified everything, every drop, every groan of wood, every subtle warning the mountains tried to give before they broke. It was there, just inside the tree line, that Officer Mara Ellison moved carefully through the storm. Mara was young, mid-20s. But there was a gravity to her that made people pause when they first met her. She was of average height, lean rather than muscular, her strength earned through discipline instead of bulk. Her posture was straight even now, shoulders squared against the wind as if she refused to let the storm bend her. Dark brown hair was pulled into a low, practical ponytail, already soaked, loose strands plastered against her pale cheeks. Her uniform jacket hung slightly oversized, still stiff with newness. The department patch on her shoulder had not yet softened with time. She had transferred to Ashford less than 3 months ago. The city had never fit her. Too much noise. Too many places to disappear. The mountains felt different. Dangerous, yes, but honest. Here, threats announced themselves. You either listened or you paid for it. Cradled tightly against her chest, sheltered beneath her open jacket, were 3 German Shepherd puppies. They were impossibly small, only a few weeks old. Their ears were still folded, their paws far too large for their bodies, dark coats softened by a haze of puppy fuzz that offered little protection from the cold rain. 2 of them whimpered weakly, thin sounds trembling out of their chests. The third cried louder, a sharp, frantic squeal that cut through the storm as if noise alone might keep it safe. Mara adjusted her grip, instinctively curling her arms tighter around them. "Easy," she whispered, though the wind tore the word apart before it could reach even her own ears. She hadn't planned to be out here this morning. The puppies weren't official yet. No tags, no paperwork. They existed in the uncomfortable space between duty and conscience. Their mother, a seasoned K9 named Haven, had been killed 2 days earlier in a freak training accident. A compromised embankment, a misjudged landing. Nothing dramatic enough to reach the evening news. Just a line in a report and a kennel that felt unbearably empty afterward. The litter had been discovered hours later. 3 survivors, too young to regulate their body heat. Too young to be left alone. Temporary care had quietly become permanent, at least for now. Mara had taken them with her for a day, then another, then another. She told herself it was practical, that someone had to keep them alive until a foster handler could be found. She knew better. The patrol vehicle waited farther down the trail, parked where the ground was firmer, beneath younger trees whose roots still held. She could just make out its blurred outline through the rain, gray against darker green. Almost there. The wind shifted. It wasn't a gust. Not exactly. It was heavier, sideways, carrying with it a low, straining sound that didn't belong to the rain. Mara stopped, her head turned instinctively, eyes lifting toward the canopy above. The storm seemed to hold its breath. The tree did not fall straight down. It came from the side. Roots tore free from waterlogged earth with a violent tearing sound, like fabric ripping under unbearable strain. The trunk twisted as it fell, branches snapping, leaves exploding outward in a spray of rain and debris. Mara barely had time to react. She pivoted on instinct, turning her body away, curling inward. Her arms tightened around the puppies as if she could shield them with herself. The impact came low. The massive trunk slammed across her left thigh, pinning it brutally against the ground. Pain detonated instantly. White, blinding, absolute. A sound ripped from her throat before she could stop it, raw and involuntary. She collapsed sideways into the mud and leaves, the world tilting violently. Something broke. She knew it without needing to look. The puppies screamed, not barks, screams. Thin, piercing cries burst from their tiny chests as they were jolted against her, soaked and shaking. One writhed desperately, another burrowed beneath her chin, the third pressed flat against her sternum, its heartbeat frantic and wild. Mara tried to move. Her body responded everywhere except her leg. Agony surged upward from her thigh, deep and crushing, radiating outward until her vision blurred and her breath vanished. She gasped, mud and rain filling her mouth, and clawed weakly at the ground with her free hand. "Help!" The word never fully formed. Another shift sent pain flaring hotter, sharper, unbearable. Her strength evaporated. Her hands trembled, then locked tight again, clinging to the puppies as if they were anchors keeping her from drifting away. Rain soaked through her uniform almost instantly. Cold crept in around the edges, stealing warmth with ruthless efficiency. Wind slid beneath her jacket, fingers of ice searching for skin. Her breathing grew shallow, too fast. She focused on the puppies because it was the only thing she could control. They were still alive, still warm. Barely. Their small bodies pressed against her chest, fragile and solid all at once. She tucked her chin down instinctively, sheltering them beneath her jaw, creating a pocket of warmth with fabric and skin. The puppies continued to cry. Their coats were plastered flat by rain. Tiny paws kneaded helplessly at her jacket. One managed to press its nose against her neck, seeking heat, seeking something steady in a world that had suddenly turned violent. The forest narrowed around her. Dark trunks blurred into streaks. Silver rain fell in sheets. Her heartbeat hammered painfully, then stumbled, then slowed. Her thoughts fractured. She thought of Haven. Steady, watchful, always at her side. She thought of the mountains at dusk, quiet and endless. She thought distantly, with a flash of panic, that she hadn't told anyone where she was going this morning. Pain surged again from her thigh, cruel and final. Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled tighter around the puppies. Then strength drained from her all at once, seeping into the mud beneath her. The fight left her body in a single, quiet wave. Mara Ellison went still. The storm did not care. Rain continued to fall, methodical and cold. Wind moved through the canopy, shaking loose leaves and broken branches that scattered across the forest floor. The fallen tree lay heavy across her thigh, unmoving, its exposed roots clawing at the air like the ribs of something long dead. The puppies did not stop crying. They huddled closer together, pressed into the curve of her arms and chest, their tiny bodies trembling violently. Their cries rose and fell in uneven rhythm. Panic layered with cold, hunger braided with confusion. They did not understand silence. They only knew that the warmth beneath them no longer moved, and the world was loud and wet and wrong. Their voices carried through the rain, slipping between trees, spilling down the slope of the mountain. The forest listened, and somewhere beyond the curtain of wind and water, something heard them. The sound cut through the storm like a blade. It was not the wind, Not thunder, not the long, hollow groan of trees bending under their own weight. It was sharper than all of it. Thin, frantic, alive. A cry that did not belong to the forest. Inside a solitary cabin set deep among the slopes of the Blue Ridge, Evan Cole lifted his head. The cabin was old but solid, built decades ago from thick pine logs darkened by time and rain. It stood where the trail thinned into nothing, where most people never wandered unless they were lost or looking to disappear. A single window rattled softly under the wind's pressure. The wood stove glowed low and steady, casting amber light across a room kept spare by choice rather than poverty. Evan rose slowly from a wooden chair near the stove. He was in his late 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, without excess bulk. His movements were economical, practiced, nothing wasted. Short, dark hair lay damp against his forehead, where sweat and heat met the chill seeping through the walls. Light stubble traced his jaw, enough to soften his features but not hide the sharpness beneath. His eyes, a muted gray-blue, had the alert stillness of a man who never fully slept, even when awake. At his feet, an old German shepherd stirred. The dog's name was Bruno. He was past his prime, muzzle grayed, joints stiff on cold mornings. But his presence filled the room with quiet authority. One ear lifted first, then the other. His body rose with deliberate care, no sudden movement, no panic. His dark eyes fixed on the door, posture rigid, tail low but steady. The sound came again. Bruno let out a low, controlled woof. Not a bark, but a warning. Evan's hand stilled mid-motion as he reached for his jacket. He listened again, filtering noise the way training had taught him to do long ago. Rain, wind, wood, and beneath it all. Puppies, he muttered, the word leaving him before he realized it. Bruno turned his head slightly, as if confirming the thought. Evan had not come to the mountains to play hero. He had come to be alone, to put distance between himself and everything that followed him out of uniform, memories that surfaced too easily, faces that refused to stay buried. The cabin was meant to be an endpoint, not a crossroads. But the sound outside did not care what he wanted. He pulled on a heavy waterproof jacket and stepped into his boots. Bruno was already at the door, waiting, not impatient, not eager, simply ready. Evan grabbed a length of rope from a hook by the wall and slung it over his shoulder, then paused, listening one last time. The cries were closer now, or maybe the wind had shifted. "All right," he said quietly. The door opened and the storm rushed in. Rain slammed sideways, soaking them both instantly. Evan leaned into it, boots sinking slightly into the saturated earth. Bruno moved ahead without hesitation, nose low, then high, drawing scent from chaos. Despite his age, the dog's gait was confident, unhurried, each step placed with care. They moved downslope, away from the cabin, toward the sound. The forest fought them at every turn. Branches lashed, mud clung to boots. Water ran in sudden channels where the ground had given up pretending to be solid. Evan's breath stayed measured, controlled, his focus narrowing until there was nothing but forward motion and the rhythm of Bruno's pace. Then he saw her. She lay half-turned on her side near the trail, rainwater pooling beneath her shoulder. A massive tree trunk stretched across her left thigh, pinning it hard to the ground. Her upper body was free, twisted slightly inward, arms locked around something small and dark pressed against her chest. Bruno stopped short and growled softly. Not at the woman, but at the fallen tree, as if marking it as the threat it was. Evan dropped to one knee beside her, rain running down his face. She was alive. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. Her skin was pale, lips tinged faintly blue from cold, but her airway was clear. No visible head wounds, no crushing weight on her torso. The damage was lower, focused, brutal, contained. "Okay," Evan said under his breath, more to himself than to her. "Okay?" The puppies shifted weakly as he leaned closer. 3 of them, German shepherds, barely more than fur and bone. Soaked through, shivering, pressed tight against her chest as if she were the last solid thing in the world. One whimpered continuously, another barely made a sound at all, the thirds breathing fast and uneven. Evan did not waste time wondering how they came to be here. He checked the woman's pulse at her neck. Present. Thready, but present. He brushed wet hair back from her face and saw the badge clipped to her uniform jacket. A police officer. Bruno moved in close, standing watch near Evan's shoulder, eyes scanning the trees with methodical patience. Evan shifted his attention to the tree. It was old, heavy. The roots had torn free completely, leaving a crater of mud and stone. There was no lifting it outright, not alone, not quickly. But it wasn't resting flat. One end had caught against a rise in the ground, leaving just enough space beneath. Enough to work. Evan planted his boots, found a fallen branch thick enough to serve as a lever, and wedged it beneath the trunk near her thigh. He braced himself, muscles tightening, breath held, and pushed. The trunk moved. Just an inch. But it was enough. He shifted his grip, pushed again. Rain slicked his hands. Mud sucked at his boots. His shoulders burned as he leaned his weight into the effort, every movement calculated, controlled. Bruno pressed in beside him, not touching, but close enough to lend presence, to anchor. With a final heave, Evan forced the trunk just high enough to slide the woman's leg free. The release was immediate. Her body jolted, a faint sound escaping her throat, but she did not wake. The leg lay at an unnatural angle, swollen already, rain-washing streaks of red through torn fabric. Evan did not look away. He wrapped his jacket tighter around the puppies first, not removing them, not separating them. Then stripped the rope from his shoulder and worked quickly. He immobilized her thigh as best he could, securing it against her other leg, careful not to tighten too much, mindful of circulation. The puppies whimpered as his hands moved, but he kept them pressed against her chest, using her body heat as the only thing standing between them and the cold. "Stay," he told Bruno quietly. The dog remained where he was, unwavering. Evan slid one arm beneath the woman's shoulders and the other beneath her knees, careful to support the injured leg. She was lighter than he expected, her body slack with unconsciousness, rainwater dripping from her hair and uniform. As he lifted her, the puppy shifted, then settled again, instinctively clinging to warmth. He rose slowly, adjusting his grip, finding balance. The forest did not make it easy. Rain pounded, wind shoved, the ground slipped beneath him, but Evan moved with the patience of someone who understood that speed was the enemy now. One step at a time, no rushing, no shortcuts. Bruno led the way, glancing back often, making sure Evan followed, his pace measured to match the burden behind him. They moved uphill, away from the fallen tree, away from the place where everything had gone wrong. Evan did not think about consequences, or reports, or questions that would come later. He thought only of weight and warmth and breath. Behind them, the storm swallowed the clearing, rain washing over the imprint their bodies had left in the mud. Ahead, through the trees, the forest thinned. The cabin waited. The cabin sat in a small clearing carved out of the mountainside, its rough-hewn logs darkened by rain and age. Water streamed off the pitched roof in steady curtains, splashing into the churned mud below. The storm had not weakened, but inside, the air was warmer, thick with wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Evan Cole laid the woman carefully onto a narrow cot, pushed close to the stove. The mattress sagged slightly under her weight, springs complaining softly. He moved with practiced restraint, keeping her injured leg aligned as he lowered her down. Her face was ashen now, lashes clumped with rain, lips parted in shallow breaths that fogged faintly in the warm air. Bruno settled nearby, lowering himself with a grunt that betrayed his age. He placed his body between the door and the cot, head up, eyes half-lidded, but alert, the posture of a dog who had guarded too many rooms to ever fully rest. Evan stripped off his soaked jacket and hung it near the stove, then turned his attention to the woman's leg. The thigh was already swelling, skin stretched tight beneath torn fabric. He cut the uniform pant leg away with a small knife, exposing bruising that darkened even as he watched. The femur was broken. There was no doubt. But the bleeding was contained, the skin intact. "Good," he murmured, not because it was good, but because it could have been far worse. He splinted the leg using 2 straight lengths of wood kept by the stove, patting them with folded cloth before binding everything in place. His hands were steady, movements efficient, betraying long hours of training he pretended not to remember. When he was finished, he adjusted the bindings just enough to secure without choking circulation. Only then did he turn his attention to the puppies. They lay clustered against the woman's chest, still tucked inside the shelter of her uniform and the extra jacket Evan had wrapped around them. Their cries had weakened to thin, irregular whines. Their bodies trembled continuously, a sign that their tiny systems were fighting to maintain warmth. He lifted one gently, cradling it in his hands. The puppy's ears were still folded, its eyes barely open, dark and unfocused. Its belly was cool to the touch. "Mild hypothermia," Evan said quietly, naming the problem to keep his mind from drifting. He placed the puppy back and shifted the stove damper slightly, careful not to overheat the room. He rolled another blanket into a tight bundle and tucked it along the woman's side, pressing warmth closer without separating them. The woman stirred. At first it was only a faint twitch at the corner of her mouth. Then a soft, broken sound escaped her throat, half breath, half protest. Evan was at her side immediately, one hand braced lightly against her shoulder. "Easy," he said. "Don't move." Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Her eyes were a clear hazel, unfocused at first, then sharpening as pain cut through the haze. She gasped, body tensing, fingers curling reflexively around the puppy's. "Leg," she whispered, voice raw. "My leg." "It's set," Evan said. "Broken, but stabilized. You're inside. You're safe." The word safe seemed to surprise her. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears that had nothing to do with fear. Her gaze shifted, taking in the cabin. The low ceiling beams, the stove, Bruno's watchful presence by the door. "Where?" Her voice trailed off. "My place," Evan answered. "Name's Evan." She nodded faintly, breath hitching as pain flared again. "Mara," she said after a moment. "Officer Mara Ellison." The puppies whimpered as if responding to her voice. She tightened her hold on them despite herself, then winced. Evan noticed the way her jaw clenched, not dramatically, not loudly, but with quiet determination. Pain did not own her. It merely occupied space. He checked her pulse again, then her pupils, watching carefully for signs of shock. Her skin was still cold, but warming slowly. Her breathing steadied. "You did good," he said, surprising himself. "Holding on to them." A shadow crossed her expression. They didn't have anyone else. The words hung between them. Minutes passed in measured silence, broken only by the crackle of the stove and the rain drumming on the roof. Evan stayed close, watching her consciousness stabilize. Bruno shifted positions once, then settled again, satisfied. Eventually, Mara spoke. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice quieter now, weighed down by more than pain. Evan met her gaze. "Talk when you're ready." She took a slow breath. "I wasn't just out there by accident." He waited. "I'm investigating illegal logging," she continued. "Not the kind that shows up on permits. Deep cuts, night operations, timber moved off-grid and sold under shell contracts." Her eyes hardened, focus sharpening despite exhaustion. It's been happening for years. Flood patterns changed, slopes destabilized. Evan's hand tightened unconsciously against the edge of the cot. "My brother died in a flash flood," he said before he could stop himself. She looked at him then, really looked. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he replied. "Just don't lie." "I'm not," she said. "That flood wasn't natural. Neither were the last 3. The rain outside seemed to deepen, as if the mountain itself were listening. "I gathered proof," Mara went on. "GPS tracks, aerial images, financial transfers, names." She hesitated, then glanced down at the puppies pressed against her chest. "I couldn't carry it on me, not after I realized someone was watching." Evan followed her gaze. "Which one?" he asked. "The smallest," she said. "Blue thread on the collar." He carefully lifted the puppy she indicated, checking the thin collar looped loosely around its neck. Sewn into the fabric was a tiny bulge, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. "A memory card," she said. "Encrypted. Everything's on it." Evan exhaled slowly. "You're certain?" She nodded. "Certain enough to risk my life." A silence settled, heavier than the storm. The cabin, Evan realized, was no accident either. Few people knew it existed. Fewer still knew how to reach it in weather like this. He had chosen it for isolation, for safety. He had never imagined it would become a shelter for something far larger than himself. "I left the service because I was tired of fighting shadows," he said quietly. "I came here to disappear." Mara studied him, eyes steady. "Then we picked the wrong place to hide," she said without accusation. Bruno lifted his head, ears angling toward the door as the wind shifted again. The storm pressed on, relentless, patient. Evan moved to the window and checked the clearing. Nothing stirred beyond rain and branches. Still, he felt the weight of what now rested under his roof. Wounded bodies, fragile lives, and a secret that could tear open the mountains if it ever surfaced. He turned back to the cot. "You'll rest," he said. "We'll keep you warm. And we won't touch that card unless we have to." Mara's grip on the puppies loosened slightly, relief softening the lines around her eyes. "Thank you," she said. Evan nodded once. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. Outside, the storm continued to carve its way through the Blue Ridge. Inside the cabin, 2 lives shaped by the same quiet, violent shared space, bound by a truth neither of them could ignore. The rain returned with renewed force, hammering the forest as if the mountain itself were trying to erase every footprint left behind. Wind pushed sheets of water sideways through the trees, blurring the world into motion and noise. Evan Cole stood just inside the cabin door, listening. Not to the storm, but to the spaces between it. Bruno lay near the threshold, his breathing heavier now, slower than before. The old German shepherd's muzzle had gone almost completely gray, his chest rising with effort after hours of vigilance. He had not slept. He had not closed his eyes. Every shift in wind, every distant crack of thunder had kept him upright, alert, guarding. Evan knelt briefly and rested a hand on the dog's broad neck. The fur was warm, damp, alive. Bruno's tail thumped once against the floor, weak but determined. "You've done enough," Evan murmured. The dog did not move away from the door. Evan straightened as a sound reached him. Faint, mechanical, wrong. It cut through the storm in short bursts. Engines, not one, several, low and controlled. He moved to the window, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to see. Headlights flickered between the trees, moving slowly, deliberately. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They weren't wandering. They were searching. Evan's jaw tightened. He crossed the room in 2 strides and crouched beside the cot. Mara Ellison was awake now, her face pale but focused, eyes sharp despite the pain that kept her breathing shallow. The puppies slept against her chest, small bodies rising and falling in uneven rhythm. "People are coming," Evan said quietly. "Not the kind we want." Mara didn't ask how he knew. She only nodded. "They found the trail." "Yes." "They won't stop," she said. "Not while the evidence exists." Evan glanced at the smallest puppy, the faint blue thread on its collar barely visible. "Then it stays hidden." He moved fast, lifting the cot side rail and helping Mara sit up just enough to slide the puppies into a wrapped bundle. She winced but didn't cry out. He admired that, her refusal to waste sound. "There's a storage cellar under the cabin," Evan said. "Old, reinforced, no windows." "Can it hold us?" she asked. "It doesn't have to," he replied. "It just has to hide you." He guided her carefully to a concealed hatch near the back wall, lifting the heavy plank to reveal a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Cold air rose from below, smelling of earth and iron. Bruno struggled to his feet and followed, each step slower than the last. Evan turned to stop him, but the dog brushed past anyway, lowering himself at the edge of the hatch as if drawn by instinct. "Stay," Evan ordered softly. Bruno didn't descend. He lay down instead, positioning his body between the opening and the rest of the room. His sides heaved. His eyes remained fixed on the door. Mara watched him, understanding dawning in her gaze. "He won't leave." "No," Evan said. "He never does." He helped her down the ladder, taking care not to jostle her leg. The puppies whimpered faintly, then quieted as her arms closed around them. Evan lowered the hatch again, sealing it just as the first knock hit the cabin door. "Search and rescue!" a voice called out, male, confident, amplified by authority. "Anyone inside?" Evan stepped forward, posture relaxed, face unreadable. He opened the door just enough to let rain spill inside. 3 men stood on the porch. The one in front was tall and lean, rain slicking his dark hair flat against his skull. He wore a high-visibility jacket over civilian clothes, boots too clean for real rescue work. His eyes were sharp, assessing, never lingering too long on any one thing. Behind him stood a broader man with a shaved head and a thick neck, shoulders hunched against the rain. His jacket strained at the seams. His hands never strayed far from his pockets. The third stayed half a step back, slighter than the others, face narrow, eyes constantly moving. He scanned the roofline, the trees, the ground. A hunter's habit. "We're checking cabins," the leader said, flashing a laminated badge too quickly. "Woman reported missing. Storm like this, people get desperate." Evan nodded once. "Just me." The leader's gaze flicked past him, catching on Bruno's shape by the hearth. The dog did not growl. He only watched. "Old dog," the man remarked casually. "Old," Evan agreed. The rain intensified, drumming harder against the roof. Water pooled at their feet. "You alone out here?" the leader asked. "Yes." "No radio?" the thinner man asked from behind. "Doesn't work in weather like this." The broad man shifted his weight. "Mind if we take a look inside? Protocol." Evan didn't move. "No." The leader smiled thinly. "You sure? We're just trying to help." Evan's eyes hardened. "Then you should keep moving." A long second passed. Thunder cracked overhead, so close it rattled the windows. Bruno's chest rose and fell faster now, breath shallow, uneven. The leader took a step back, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "All right, just doing our due diligence." As they turned away, Bruno let out a low sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A warning carried on, breath alone. The thinner man paused, looking back. His gaze met Bruno's. Something flickered across his face. Calculation, then irritation. "Let's go," the leader said. "Storm's getting worse." They disappeared into the rain, engines starting moments later, fading into the forest as the wind swallowed the sound. Evan closed the door and leaned against it, listening until the last vibration died away. Only then did he move. Bruno remained on the floor, his body rigid, breath coming in short, strained pulls. Evan crossed the room and knelt, one hand slipping beneath the dog's chest. "Easy," he whispered. Bruno's eyes found his. The intelligence there, the trust, cut deeper than any wound. His tail twitched once, then went still. The storm roared outside, indifferent. Evan stayed with him until the breathing slowed, then stopped altogether. There was no drama, no final sound, just silence where vigilance had lived moments before. Evan bowed his head, forehead resting briefly against the dog's broad skull. "You kept them safe," he said, voice rough. That was enough. When he rose, the cabin felt emptier, larger in all the wrong ways. He returned to the hatch and opened it. Mara looked up at him, eyes already searching his face. "He didn't move," she said quietly. "No," Evan replied. "He didn't." She closed her eyes for a moment, holding the puppies tighter. The smallest one stirred, pressing its nose against her collarbone. Above them, the rain began to fall even harder, washing the clearing clean. The storm had taken its due. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in long, steady beams, turning wet leaves into glass and drawing steam from the forest floor. The rain had finally loosened its grip on the mountains, leaving behind a Blue Ridge washed clean. Streams running clear, birds returning in cautious bursts of sound. Where the storm had ruled, summer now claimed its place. A helicopter settled into the clearing with controlled precision, rotors easing to silence. Federal agents moved quickly but without panic, boots sinking into soft earth. The lead agent, Claire Donovan, stepped forward first. She was in her early 40s, tall and angular, dark hair pulled into a tight knot beneath her cap. Her eyes were steady, practiced. Someone who had learned to separate urgency from noise. Evan Cole stood near the cabin, hands at his sides, posture calm. He hadn't slept much. Grief sat behind his eyes, but resolve held the line. When Donovan approached, she studied him briefly, then nodded. "Mr. Cole," she said, "we're ready." Mara Ellison was brought out next, carried carefully on a stretcher by a medical team. She was pale but alert, dark hair braided tight against her head, jaw set with the same quiet determination that had kept her conscious through pain and fear. Her broken thigh was immobilized, wrapped in clean splints and gauze. The puppies rested against her chest, bundled and warm, their breathing even. As she was loaded into the helicopter, Mara met Evan's gaze. No words passed between them. None were needed. The flight down the mountain was smooth. At the regional medical center, surgeons confirmed what Evan had already known. The break was severe, but clean. Repair was straightforward. Recovery would take time, but the outcome was good. Mara woke hours later to sunlight streaming through a wide window and the soft chorus of monitors. She exhaled, relief loosening something deep in her chest. The evidence moved faster than the healing. The smallest puppy's collar, blue thread faded but intact, was opened in a sterile room by federal technicians. Inside, the encrypted memory card revealed its weight. GPS trails mapped illegal clear-cuts across protected slopes. Transaction ledgers tied shell companies to timber shipments laundered through regional ports. Messages documented threats, payoffs, and directives issued from offices that were supposed to safeguard the land. A task force formed within days. At its head stood Donovan, flanked by specialists in environmental law, financial crimes, and violent conspiracies. They moved quietly but relentlessly. Warrants were signed. Assets frozen. Trucks seized mid-transport. A timber magnate named Wallace Kerr, thick-set, silver-haired, accustomed to boardrooms and deference. Was arrested at dawn in a lakefront home he'd purchased with laundered profits. His face, usually arranged into confidence, crumpled into disbelief. The net widened. A county commissioner with a polished smile and a taste for campaign dinners was indicted on corruption charges. A senior law enforcement officer, broad-shouldered, uniform immaculate, reputation spotless, was taken into custody under the eyes of cameras he once welcomed. His hands shook as cuffs closed around his wrists. The courtroom proceedings drew national attention. Judge Raymond Holt presided, a spare man in his late 60s with iron-gray hair and an unyielding gaze. He listened without interruption as prosecutors laid out the case. Environmental devastation traced to illegal logging, a pattern of intimidation, the attempted silencing of a witness. When Mara testified, she did so seated, leg elevated, voice steady. She described the trees cut at night, the slopes destabilized, the floods that followed. She named names. She described the threat, the pursuit, the storm. The defense argued complexity. The judge answered with clarity. Sentencing came swift and precise. Wallace Kerr received 25 years in federal prison. The counts read aloud carried the weight of what he had done. Severe environmental destruction, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice. His assets were forfeited, his companies dissolved. The courtroom remained silent as the gavel fell. The accomplices followed. 8 to 15 years handed down to managers, fixers, and enforcers. Heavy fines levied, properties seized. A trust established to fund restoration of the damaged forest. Beyond the courtroom, the land itself gained protection. The Blue Ridge Corridor, where the damage had been worst, was placed under mandatory conservation status. Oversight transferred to a joint environmental authority with federal backing. Logging roads were dismantled, saplings planted, watersheds stabilized. The mountain breathed again. Mara healed with patience and stubborn resolve. Weeks passed, then months. She learned to walk without assistance, then with confidence. Her promotion arrived quietly, a recognition earned rather than announced. She accepted command of a new forest protection unit charged with prevention, enforcement, and education. Her office windows faced the mountains. She kept them open whenever weather allowed. The puppies grew. One, broad-chested and focused, entered formal canine training. He took to the work with instinctive ease, tracking scents and commands with a seriousness that mirrored his handlers. Another remained at the cabin, a steady presence amid quiet mornings and long shadows. The third stayed with Mara, a constant companion through recovery and responsibility, ears perking whenever she reached for the door. Evan packed lightly. He stood in the cabin one last time, sunlight warming the floor where rain had once pooled. He buried Bruno beneath a stand of oaks, marking the place with a simple stone. There were no speeches, only gratitude. When he left, he did so without haste. The past no longer chased him. It followed at a respectful distance, lessons learned rather than wounds reopened. At summer's end, the forest shimmered in gold and green. Light threaded through branches that had survived because someone refused to look away. Justice stood firm, not as spectacle, but as structure. Lives continued, altered but intact. The storm was over. Some storms don't arrive with thunder. They come quietly, through greed, silence, and the choice to look away. This story is a reminder that what happens in distant forests always reaches our daily lives. The water we drink, the ground we stand on, the safety we assume will always be there. When one person chooses to protect what is fragile, whether it's a forest, a truth, or a small life in their arms, the impact travels farther than they'll ever see. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it limps, it whispers, it holds on. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it with someone who believes that doing the right thing still matters. Let us know in the comments what part stayed with you, or if you've ever witnessed quiet bravery in your own life. And if you believe that justice, compassion, and second chances are worth protecting, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach others who may need them today.